Hello, this is Margaret Ajibode, the STEM Positive Disruptor, and I have on my guest a special guest on Mia's conversation, Professor Astrid Linder, and she's part of the traffic safety at Swedish National Road and Transport Research Institute, that's VTI. And she's come on my platform today to just talk about. We want to celebrate what she's achieved, but also talk about what she does and why she decided to go on this pathway. Um, and then without further ado, we're just going to start the conversation. So again, thank you, Professor Linda, for coming on board and having a conversation with us on this platform. Again, the reason why we've done this is to educate, raise awareness, change people's perception, demystify what STEM is, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's about getting the public into our domain, showing what engineering or STEM as a whole is doing in our world, the difference we're making. And so my special guest is that in its element. So without further ado, again, I say thank you, Professor, for coming on board.
Thank you very much for having me on board.
No problem. So please, let's just start with you just introducing yourself. I've done that, but I think there's so much more to you that I think people would like to know because we want to celebrate what you've achieved as well.
Yeah, as you said, I'm a professor of traffic safety at VTI, and I'm also a adjunct professor at Chalmers University at the vehicle safety department, and at Chalmers University that was actually where I started. Yeah, my where I have my education, like in engineering physics, and where I also then did my PhD. So I'm enjoying working together with my former supervisor today, Professor Mats Svensson at Chalmers. So yeah, this is some of the background.
Well, well, thank you, because one of the things we do, we undermine what we have achieved. We don't showcase that. And I think it's so important that it's okay to be who you are because you've done so much. You're quite highly educated, but also you're making headway where safety is concerned in transportation. And I applaud you because you have been given quite a few accolades. So the Quality Star of the Year and Sweden, but also the US Safety Engineering Excellence. There's more accolades, but we want to celebrate you. We'll celebrate what you have achieved. We also want to showcase what you are doing as well, because one of the things that you're quite keen about is ensuring that there's a fair play where safety is concerned, where transportation is concerned. And I know you led the team where you created a dummy. And there's the two aspects. There's the rare side of it and also the virtual dummy as well. Can you please explain more on that and why you felt it was important to go through that avenue?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Of course, it goes back to where I mentioned I was a PhD student at Chalmers. So it goes back to the 90s and late 90s, where I was a part of a project where we developed the first actually crash test dummy for low severity re-impacts. And the reason we did that was that we were addressing long injuries with long-term consequences, disabling injuries, and in this case, soft tissue neck injuries, often called whiplash injuries. So it was guided by the injury statistics, telling us that this is here there is an event and circumstances where we have the risk of losing our health. So and then as a part of being a PhD student, I also did a literature review and then saw that we had known since this late 60s, 1960s. This is wow. That females were less well protected than men in these type of crashes. And since we were doing a model of an average male as part of when I was a PhD student, then I thought that the next logical step would be to, and I also became aware of that we didn't have the female part of the population represented in crash test dummies and in testing. Then I thought for this, in particular for this specific type of crash and these injuries, we should have both part of the population represented as an average male and an average female. So to ensure that we assess the safety performances for the whole population. So yeah, that was 1999. I did that literature review, and then yeah, I continued on that path. I presented my thesis, defended that in 2002, and since then I have been in this area and, among other things, tried to get funding for doing the research that I saw a need for, and also put together consortia to address this topic broadly.
Indeed, because I mean it's the EU project with ADSEED. That's isn't it, the first virtual dummy? And also you did the other one, which is to do with seats evaluation. That's in tool set 50F. And how's that going? Because one of the things that you made mention and you're quite keen about is to change the laws, because it's preventing gender inequality where safety is concerned, vehicle safety. So since because you're leading this project and it's already, I'm assuming it's active. So is it making that difference? How is it impacting our world where transportation or crash testing is concerned?
Yeah, what we, as you highlight, we had I initiated, coordinated, and finalized. We finalized the ADSEED project 10 plus years ago, and where we did a virtual model of a dummy model of an average female to show that because prior to that often it was said that, oh yeah, we should do that, but we don't have the data and it's so difficult and it's not available and so on. So then we did this virtual model, a dummy model, to show that the data is there and it can be done in the same way, or we can use the same method as we have done when addressing the male part of the population. So that model is, we did that together with a dummy manufacturer to ensure that it's was provided, that you can buy it and so on. So it's you can still buy the license for that one by Humanetics. But what we then realized was that it didn't really gain any particular momentum. It didn't gain a particular big interest or activities. So then we took another step to go more into the virtual testing tools and developed actually a model of an average female in what is called human body model. That is a model not of a crash test, but of a human body in terms of skeleton, soft parts, and so on. So it looks it is anatomically the way we are built, and much more detailed, not used in the assessment of safety yet, but used in the development of safety by car manufacturers and those that suppliers of safety systems. So and in addition to doing this model, human body model of an average female, an individual, then we also took the open source approach, because what I also then saw here, or we saw together, was that much is happening in different organizations, but we lack often the possibility to share, because we use different license softwares and cannot share the models. So therefore we also did it open source. And then we took the next step in the project that you mentioned, where we did the seat evaluation tools, and the big part there is actually to make an open source set of human body models designed in the same way of an average male and an average female as seated occupant, but also as standing occupants, like and vulnerable road users, pedestrians, bicyclists, and so on, so that you address all road users.
Yeah.
So then it expanded that way, and that is where we are today. And in order to then show all the tools needed in a virtual test chain, where you do the virtual testing and then confirming that it corresponds to what will happen in the real world.
Yeah.
Then we did a seat evaluation tool, which is not a commercial crash test dummy, but a dummy, of course, if you like. In that way, you use it in the crash lab, where of an average female and an average male.
Wow.
But what I also then discovered here during these years was that actually in legislation in our in the UN in the UNECE test, which is type approval test, but we have two sorts in the world. It's either that one or the FMVSS that is used in the US. There it is. It says in the regulation that you have to use a model of an average male. So then I realized that, okay, if this is what we as a society demand, then of course we cannot expect anything else from the industry. So that was another dimension, looking into it from that perspective, and that's still the case, that this is the requirements in the regulatory tests.
Well, that's so. Isn't that it's silly? I'm sorry, but because if you think about it, I mean, there's not just a male. I mean, if you're going to say we're going to get the true picture of what really happens, you have to take into account the bigger picture, which means both female and male. So the laws has to change. So how do you propose? Yeah, go on.
The law is okay in the EU. The law says that it should be so, because we looked at that also from a law perspective. So I wrote a paper on this together with an expert from that area. And the law in the European Union is clear. In several articles, it says that males and females should be treated equally, and it should be equally represented in the regulation. But the regulation is that we apply. This is what is negotiated and established globally under the UN. So this is the level. If you like.
Okay, so I just want to get this straight in my head and my understanding, because I don't want to jump into conclusion that's not real. You're saying that, okay, within the EU, it works well, the law works, but it doesn't.
The law is clear that men and women should be treated equally.
Equally, that's fine. But
that's the regulation. When you do the actual test, the type approval test for a product to be sold, then you have to use a model of an average male.
That's what I'm okay.
Yeah, and the argument for that is, of course, also the argument is that but this is the only model we have. So it's a chicken and egg thing, because we don't have a model of an average female, so we cannot use a model of an average female, and we don't require a model of an average female, so therefore we don't develop it, and so on.
But that does not make sense. I appreciate what you said. The law, okay, in theory works, but in reality, there are things that are missing. So you talk about the regulation, and so that has to change. So what I'm trying to understand here, ma'am, is this. is that then how do we make that difference? Because the reality is that there's both female and there's both male. It's been from the outset, there's no difference. So the common sense will say, hold on, we have to develop this dummy to enable us to be fair in our delivery, in our testing.
But even if you develop this dummy, it will not be used if the regulation requires you. So even if a car manufacturer would develop a model of an average and do the testing, the regulators, society, would say, we will not regard those test results because this is not what is the specification is. And taking it to the question of how this is addressed, it is negotiated under the umbrella of UN in Geneva, and it's those that can influence that process are countries. So it's representative of each and every country that is part of the UN.
Fair enough. I'm not, but there's a problem, isn't it? So based on your experience, based on what you've been trying to achieve, because all the work behind the scene that you're trying to make a difference in, if it's not translated in a tangible way, it's all a waste of time. Not in a disrespectful way. I'm not saying it is. But what I'm saying, if the regulators, if the regulators are not really taking into account the need for that, for a female jump to develop, because they feel there is no need, because there isn't this or because of that, based on what you want to achieve, based on what your difference, because you're making that difference in the research world, but we need tangible results of that. Tell me what you would like to see done.
No, but I think we as often you need to address it from different perspective, and one such aspect is regulation, as we talked about. Regulation, and it's important to remember, regulation is the minimum requirement, right? It is. So and there is a process. There is a there have been for a number of years a help group that has discussed this, and it might become a more formal group, and that work is led by shared by Sweden, and there are a number of countries that are interested in or want to participate in this. But of course, there are many more countries in the UN that are not there, and all work in the UN is on, you choose in what group and what topic you want to be involved and engaged. So that is up to each and every country. So to make it simple, it does matter how we vote, because this is our politicians that decide if this is important or not. But on the other end of this spectrum, we have consumer information, and we have, when it comes to assessment of safety of vehicles, we have organizations such as NCAP, your NCAP in Europe, and we also have Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, for example, in the US. So in for example, the Virtual project, and also in that project, we worked, of course, very closely together with consumer information organizations, because that is another way to influence how safety is assessed. It's not regulation, it's not minimum, but it's the opposite, identifying the very best performing cars in this case. So yeah, you do I do a bit of both.
I applaud you, and I respect what you're doing, and I respect where you're making that difference. But if we're still saying, even though we are very much aware the 60s that this was happening, and there's still data showing that 73%, based on I think a data in the US, I'm just quoting because again, they're saying that 73% women are more likely to be seriously injured than men, and then 17% more females are most likely to die than men in a vehicle crash. And we're still, and there's this regulatory things as to where there isn't that demand or there isn't need based on who's going to go for. Well, but what about from the industry aspect? Because really the industry are creating these vehicles, it doesn't matter what type of transportation it is. So do you think maybe we need to look at it from a slightly different way, looking at it from the industry, the automotive industry, those that are all aerospace, wherever the transportation is being created? Do you think there's another way for us to try and bring that change into place?
Yeah, but of course, when I described how I have worked, or we have worked, but it's of course not only me, with both when addressing regulation and the consumer information, we also do this together with vehicle manufacturers. Of course,
Okay.
because they are the one making the difference on the roads, as you highlight. So we have very safety conscious industry in Sweden, Volvo, but there are also others like Toyota has been very engaged and part of our initiatives in different ways, or yeah, French car manufacturers and others. So and that will vary depending on the project, depending on their circumstances. But this is absolutely, and I think it's very good that you highlight this. This is something that we do together, because at the end of the day, it is the vehicle manufacturers that makes the difference.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what knowledge is around there if it's not implemented in our vehicles. And there are a lot of positive good reasons to be positive in terms of the development. So the safety is increasing, the protection for us in cars in general, and latest studies also confirms that when it comes to, for example, fatalities. So we a lot of different systems, and now we're not talking only crash test dummies, but we are talking about autonomous emergency brake, for example, that brake systems that reduce the energy. So now we're into the engineering, reduce the energy in the crash, and that is beneficial for everybody. So there are, and there are more driver support systems that will active system in different ways, identifying, you know, how if something that could be developing into something critical, can you know, how to avoid it and so on. So and also when it comes to detection of pedestrians, and you know, yeah, so these are just examples. So there is a good reason for being optimistic, if you like, in that respect, that we are improving safety and we are putting effort into it in very, very many different ways. And then when it comes to disabling injuries, we don't see this trend that also we are closing the gap between females and males. It's still considerably higher risk for females than males, and that is the latest data also showing this. So so there is still a need for us to be addressed equally. And also, of course, if you we are going more into an advanced area where we are talking about how to protect different occupants, for example, of different age. If we don't have males and females represented, then will be looking at older males, to put it simply. So, and also when you're talking about personalizing, for example, and make the best performance of the seatbelt, the torso that the seatbelt is assessed on is a model of an average male.
You're doing such great work, and I love the idea, because of course your work can only be as great as the people that are involved, and he talks about the manufacturers, the different elements of people that come together. But of course, there's still that issue, that question, that hold on, we're still being driven by that, as it's always been. It's always been from a male perspective. You're bringing that difference in, but we want to make that change. And then you're making those headways, and we know that improvement has been made. Safety is much better for everyone in general, but there's still elements that still needs to be addressed. So just a very final, very short and very brief, what would you like to see happen concerning safety? Very briefly.
As I mentioned, we are on a positive development trend. I would keep up the good work, keep up the momentum, demand safety as we demand. This is if this had been an epidemic, we would have put so much resources into preventing these 1.3 million people every year from dying, and many times more from being seriously injured. So acknowledge that this is the road transport system is something we have designed. It's not an unknown virus. It's not something that we have to figure out how it's done. We have done it, and we can decide. We can have a transport system without us losing life and health. And if that happens, it should be treated and be as rare as when an airplane falls from the sky.
Indeed. Joe, thank you, Professor Linder. I really appreciate you coming on board. I appreciate what you're doing and making that headway where safety is concerned, where we want that equality, where female and male are having that same enablement, where safety is concerned, where there's a crash. We know that the prevention of it being more serious for one gender to the other is balanced out. And, I say to the industry, I say to the regulators, I say to countries that, they have to take on board what you're doing and make that difference, because we are made up of both females and males, and we can't take anything away from that. That's how it's been from the outset. And so
I think also, in addition, embrace that and see that as strength.
Very true. It is strength. Unity is power. We are powerful together, and we need to, and that's what you're doing, and that's what you're showcasing, and your research and the team you're working with is making that difference. But we want it to be more where the whole world takes on board what you're doing, so we can make that difference. That's why we do what we do. That's why you do what you do, and to be that positive difference. Of course, we've got to be optimistic, but if we can make those tangible difference, that's what we should be doing, and that's what you're doing. So again, thank you so much, Professor Linder, for coming on board, just having a conversation with me on this MERS conversation as a STEM Positive Disruptor. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful to you, but also grateful for what you're achieving as well. So thank you again very much for your input and just having that conversation with us. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.